Hello, welcome again to McMay's Academy. And today is a follow-up on the part one of game theory, where we introduced ourselves to the basic concepts. And so in our previous discussion, if you had seen, as the discussion goes on, I'll be changing between windows to help in the teaching process. So in the previous video, we introduced ourselves to the concepts of game theory as the mathematical framework. So that's the math framework. And so if you have forgotten, you could revise that and be able to understand that the game, that is the strategic interrelationship between the players, is called the game itself. So it's the game that is many interactions of strategies. Yes. So the strategic interaction between the players are what you call the game. Now, within the game, we have partners or players of the game, so to say, because each game has got its players. So in game theory, there are also players to the game. And these players, like we remember, they could be individuals. The players could be firms. The players could also be nations. Okay, so I made a particular example with the strategic interrelationship between players like the United States and the Soviet Union during the arms race. So each party wants to disarm, but to disarm means that you live in the other party and at a strategic advantage. But if you both disarm, then you save costs and you reduce global threats. But because each party does not trust each other, so each player's strategy is to make a decision factoring in that other player's strategies. And so we end up keeping on the arms race going on. And that increases global threats and increases cost as well. And so after understanding the players, then we're also able to appreciate that the decisions that are being made are called the strategies. And the set of strategies available to each player is called the strategy set. So whether to sleep or not to sleep, are these two strategies available to you? Then these two become the strategy sets. Okay. Now, whenever the game is being played, at the end of the game, I don't sleep, you don't sleep. Whichever reward accrues to us, whichever returns we receive, that return is called the payoff. The payoff. And so it is understandable that the payoff are the returns. The returns at the end of the game. So by way of recap, these are what we treated in our previous video on the game theory 101, the part one, basic concepts. Right. Now, today we'll be talking about two important things as the part two. We'll be talking about what you call the dominant strategy. And by now we know what's a strategy. And so we just qualify the strategy with a dominant strategy. And the almighty Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium. Okay, so in this part of the video, we're going to talk about these two, the Nash equilibrium and that of the dominant strategy. So let's start with the dominant strategy as I change between windows. Right, now a dominant strategy is the best response that a player always makes, irrespective of the strategy the second player plays. And so if you can see from the definition, like I said, these are from Masculel et al. 1995 as our main reference material. So a dominant strategy is a SI star for player one. That means that the start strategy is the best response to all the strategy profiles of the other player. Right. And so a dominant strategy always has to be that best response no matter whatever strategy the second player plays. And it usually leads to what we call the Nash equilibrium, but not necessarily. It's a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. We talk about those exceptional cases where there are no dominant strategies, but there has to be a Nash equilibrium. And there are situations where we have two or more dominant strategies. The dominant strategy hasn't got to be one. We'll talk about those exceptional cases, but the ideal situation is that there has to be a dominant strategy for a player. For instance, Seth, let's take that example. We understand there's a game being played by Seth and Isaac. So Seth has strategies to either learn or not learn. Isaac also has the strategy sets to either learn or not learn. Now, suppose we are doing a strategy for Seth. Suppose Isaac decides to learn, and Seth says that, okay, since Isaac has learned, I'm also going to learn. So Seth has decided to learn since Isaac has learned. Now, suppose Isaac does not learn, but Seth still decides to learn. It means that irrespective of what Isaac does, Seth chose to learn. That means Seth has a dominant strategy, which is S1 star, which is to learn. It means that no matter what Isaac did, Seth stuck to his decision or strategy of learning. For whatever reason, he will not more consider the decision of Isaac. And that means that Seth has a dominant strategy to learn. That's what we define by a dominant strategy. It's the best response. It means that learning, according to Seth, gives him higher payoffs or higher payouts, no matter what Isaac does. Okay, now let's talk about the strategies for Isaac. Isaac might also decide, okay, so Isaac, now we are doing these strategies for Isaac. So Seth decides to learn or not learn. Then we have Isaac's decisions, strategies, which also include either to learn or not to learn. So suppose Seth decides to learn, and Isaac says, okay, since Seth has learned, let me leave it to him. Then I'll borrow from him that we all pass the exam. So Isaac decides not to learn because Seth has learned. Then the next day, when the game is played another time, Seth decides, okay, since Isaac didn't learn, I'm also not going to learn. So Isaac decides, Seth decides not to learn. What would you expect? You'd expect Isaac to learn, to pass the exam. But Isaac still insists, I will not learn anymore. You could see what's happening. So irrespective of what Seth did, Isaac decided to play the strategy of not learning. It means that Isaac has the dominant strategy of not learning. Now you could see that the best response has always got to be a member of the strategy sets. And so you could see that whatever was the decision not to learn, that's the dominant strategy. It has to be a member of the strategy sets available. And the strategy sets are learn or not to learn. So there is no way a best strategy would be outside the strategy sets available to the player. And that is what we need to make clear. Now, if both the dominant strategy of sets and Isaac intersect, that leads us with what you call the Nash equilibrium. And so you see that a Nash equilibrium would always be the intersection of the dominant strategies for both players. That means that strategy played by both players gives them the best response, irrespective of whatever each other player does. Great. So let's go back to our studies and see. So we can see from our notations here that, sorry about that. We can see from our notation here that in the instance, let's get something for our work. Okay, so in the instance, you see that S1 star is a strategy played by player one, but based on the other strategies of the other, which does not influence player one's best strategy. And that is the dominant strategy we're talking about. And mostly dominant strategies lead to Nash equilibrium, but that is not a sufficient condition for Nash equilibrium. We'll talk about them. So now let's talk about the Nash equilibrium. The Nash equilibrium, like I showed on the whiteboard, is the set of strategies that are best for all the players, no matter what each player does. Their outcome will not be better off. So with a Nash equilibrium, we are saying that each player is making the best possible decision based on what the others are doing. And there's no incentive for the player to make a choice, a different choice after a Nash equilibrium. Remember, Nash equilibrium are made from dominant strategies, and your dominant strategies are your best responses. It means that if you make a Nash, if you're in a Nash equilibrium and you decide to change your decision, you are going to be worse off. Okay, so a Nash equilibrium is that strategy that gives you the best payouts wherever there is no other incentive for you to change your decision. That's a Nash equilibrium. Great. So by notification, we are seeing that Nash equilibrium is always the best response, like we said, and it is made up of the dominant strategies that is played by each players. Okay. And it's also based on the strategies played by the second player. But of course, the second player strategies do not influence the dominant strategy, leading to the Nash equilibrium of the player in question. All right. Great. So let's take a look at how to represent all these notations. Now you could see from the last two equations or notations, U1, that is the payout for player one, is based on S1 star. That's the dominant strategy for S1 and the dominant strategy for S2. So U1 to bracket S1 star, S2 star, that is the Nash equilibrium. And I say that the Nash equilibrium gives higher payout, the best response. Okay, so in that regard, let's just represent it this way. That in a Nash equilibrium, the first player plays his dominant strategy, and the second player also plays his dominant strategy. That gives you the Nash equilibrium for player one. From our discussions, if both players are playing their Nash equilibrium, then it means that the payout to player one at the Nash equilibrium would always be bigger than player one playing any other strategy. So there's no start to it. So player one playing any other strategy, which is not the dominant strategy, not the best response. And player two playing his best strategy. So even if player two plays his best strategy and player one plays any other strategy which is not the best to him, then that utility, that payout will always be lesser than player one playing his best strategy. And so you could see that dominant strategy is always going to give you the best response and always going to give you the best strategy. Same could be written for player two. So player two payout at Nash equilibrium will be made up of player two's dominant strategy, taking care of or taking account of player one's strategy. And this Nash equilibrium for player two will always be bigger than player two, where he plays any other strategy, which is not the best. So no star. Taking account of player one playing his best strategy. So even if player one plays his best strategy and player two doesn't play his best strategy, he ends up with a payoff, which is lesser than player two when he plays his dominant strategy, his best response. And player two, player one plays his best response. In essence, we are saying that the dominant strategy is made up of best responses. And the Nash equilibrium is also best responses for the two players. So what happens is that if player one, let's talk about player two, for instance. If player two decides to play any other strategy, which is not a dominant strategy, he ends up on a lower payout. And that's why we are saying that the Nash equilibrium is Pareto optimal, which means that there is no incentive for player two to change his strategy. Any other decision to change the strategy leads him to a worse off situation. And so with a rational utility personnel deciding to make maximum satisfactions, he wouldn't or she wouldn't make that decision. So we are going to need these dominant strategies and that of the Nash equilibrium in our next video when we are talking about the types of games, starting with the Prisoner's Dilemma, then we talk about the Battle of Sexes. So thank you for making time. Kindly have time to subscribe to the channel, share it with other persons who might be in need. And don't forget, the essence for subscription is such that any other time there's a new video uploaded, you'll be the first person, be part of the first people to access this video, to get notified. I understand you could be having various sources to learn. This could be an additional resources. So don't forget to subscribe and share to other persons as well. Thank you. If you have other questions also, you can put them into the comment section. I'll look them up, respond to it. And if you have interest in any other particular topic, you can just put it down. I'll look at it and prepare according for you. At this point, all topics I choose to treat, they are based on self-selection, which I believe are of essence needful to undergrads, postgrads as well. Thank you and see you in our next video.